I want to put this at the top of the video so I can address it as soon as possible. I'm not a fan of doom slot posting, nor am I actively trying to. No one has told me that of the sorts, but I do notice that YouTube has been pushing specific videos out, while others not so much. If you enjoy that type of content, that's all good. I'm not going to yuck your yum. However, I don't want that to become the expectation of me when it comes to being a content creator. I'm just a very opinionated guy who spends way too much time thinking about video games to the point where I turn on the microphone and start talking into it. Nearly all my videos are not scripted. It is just me speaking on my mind at whatever I'm thinking about at a given moment. With that being said, today's video is a lot more scripted, and more specifically, my thoughts on the depth in Destiny 2. Without a further ado, please enjoy. A few days ago, I put out a short TikTok on build crafting in Destiny and my thoughts on it. It can be summarized down to, I think that the game has become way more simple, actively doing harm to Destiny in every way possible. When Destiny 2 launched, there was a worry that Destiny was too nerdy and grindy, so Bungie decided to make Destiny 2 have mass appeal, which was only good for about 6 weeks. It took until Forsaken to fix the game to how it worked in Destiny 1 in terms of weapons, but a little bit better. There was Masterworks, Catalyst, kinetic special weapons, and new weapon types. Shadowkeep expanded the armor to have more depth than it did in Destiny 1, with having all 6 stats that were from the original game on your armor now, alongside the early versions of combat mods that would keep being released up until the next expansion. Beyond Light added fragments and aspects to a new subclass alongside elemental wells, and the Witch Queen brought crafting to the game. Then Lightfall happened. Bungie had discovered new players and not understand how the combat mod system worked, so what did they do to their nerdy, grindy game when they wanted to appeal to the masses again? They got rid of the depth and replaced it with a worse version for the players who were going to play for longer than those who only hopped into the Destiny because it had mass appeal. I feel like I've seen this somewhere before. Fast forward to the final shape and the introduction of what seems like an ability-focused sandbox with prismatic at the front of everything. Imagine a subclass where you have nearly every element of verb active at a given moment, and you deal a ton of damage with your abilities because subclasses have gained access to an exotic that grants them some of the most powerful effects in the game. That was prismatic, and looking back, that subclass would be perfect for a final subclass to a game if the final shape was the end of Destiny 2, but given the title of the video, you know that's not true. Fast forward to the Edge of Fates, where every armor piece and weapon gets a soft sunset for a new rarity system, which is honestly just an RNG reducer and a power creep enhancer, while stats get a complete rework to give you increased ability, damage, and uptime, so nearly every aspect of the game feels like prismatic on steroids. Ash and Iron grants increased ability uptime while tuning a few stats to work with abilities it did not before, looking at you, Arc Souls, and Hellion. Renegades, while not really nerfing anything, buffed some underperforming classes like Void Titan and Hunter, which honestly was good for the sandbox. However, that leads until now. We're 3 weeks away from an update that we have no information on what the sandbox is changing, no information on new content, and no information on the future of Destiny 2. What a time to be a fan. Please hold your applause because we need to talk about the current sandbox and its depth compared to years prior. Currently, the sandbox is extremely power corrupt and unbalanced. Stat dumping is how you play the game, or you use 2 rocket pulses and clear most content with ease. Or you do both of those things. There are about 3 different types of players right now. There's the stat stacker, think Getaway Artist Warlock, Grapple Melee Hunter, 200 weapons / super DPS loadouts, or PvP cheese loadouts that abuse one-shots. There's the Portal Slop Build Crafter, aka me, tries to use a unique interaction between exotics and artifact perks to make a temporary build that works well in the Portal Ops mainly. You might even find a Venn diagram of PvP players who play like this, think someone like Gimme Cakes. And then there's normal people. They don't care about their stats too much, or they don't really care to look into it too much because they only care about using the gear that they like. Now I want to make it clear that I'm not shaming anyone for playing one playstyle over the other, because the sandbox is quite literally encouraging you to play in any of these ways. And until Bungie makes changes to the sandbox, people will continue to play this way. So what is my current issue with the sandbox, you may ask? To put it simply, Destiny lacks depth. As of the Renegade's 5th month with 0 sandbox changes. Armor only buffs weapons in a few ways which don't really feel impactful unless you're a stat stacker using 3x of a single mod on each piece of armor, or you're using an exotic like Peacekeepers and Lucky Pants. Armor combat mods are dull versions of old. Weapon choice is mainly dependent on what deals good damage, while giving you another super to cast while doing damage. The only mod that affects a specific weapon type is going to be Lucent Blades, which affects swords and glaives, but I don't know a single person that uses it for glaives, so it might as well only be for swords. And that's where I want to start my discussion on how we got here. Back in Season of the Dawn, a new system of mods were released, and these mods could only be put onto Dawn armor. Personally, I was okay with this because it meant that if you wanted the new powerful mods, you needed to get new armor instead of using the old ones. I'm always in favor of using new gear when a system comes out. Back during the Edge of Fate, I was only using new gear when it came to my loadouts, but that could also be tied back to the avant-garde modifier. Back to Season of the Dawn, these mods change how you play the game on a massive level if you ask me. Let me break down the basics. Starting off, there were 4 mods that could be equipped to any armor element type. Yes, armor back then had element types that dictated what type of mods you could put on the armor. Personally, I thought that was pretty cool. These were the way you became Charge of Light alongside the way you would spend these charges of light. The main way players used these mods was taking charge, Orb of Power equals 1 charge for Charge of Light, and high energy fire, 20% increased damage until your next final blow. These were not cheap mods either. High energy fire took 4 out of the 10 energy slots of an armor piece to be used and was the only type of damage mod you could equip on a piece of armor. At this time, you could only stack 2 stacks of Charge of Light without the use of another mod, so if you wanted to have more than 2, you would need to use 2 armor pieces, 1 to gain the extra stack and 1 to be able to generate stacks in general. It was truly an investment at the time of the game. And if you don't believe me, I'll fill you in the cost of these mods compared to the mods of today. Starting off with Powerful Friends, which currently costs 1 energy, used to cost 4, and even more if you wanted to gain the extra 20 mobility that also came with the mod. Protective Light, which is now Emergency Reinforcements, used to cost 2 energy and would consume all armor charges while taking 10 strength away from your build. Its original effect also used to be way stronger, granting you effectively a Void Overshield in terms of DR. Firepower, not to be confused with the firepower of today, was the original version of Grenade Kickstart, which used to be 4 energy, and you could not use multiple on one armor piece, meaning if you wanted a full grenade back when throwing it, at the time this was a crazy strong thing, you would need to use all 5 armor pieces to gain this effect. While these effects are tiny compared to today, they granted a depth to build crafting and a bit of sacrifice if you wanted a strong build. Build crafting was unique, and this was just the start of the new system that Destiny 1 had not seen in its time. Builds became a thing where in the past it was just a subclass node, weapon choice, and exotic. Now we had armor stats, elements, artifact mods, and combat mods, which could turn something like Dawnblade to feeling like a Destiny 1 Sunslinger with sunbracers, heavy-handed, and taking charge. In the early days, it was popular to take taking charge, Powerful Friends, stack on stacks, charged up, and high energy fire, as it was a means to grant everyone 20% extra damage. Some may have found this annoying in the early days, but I found it as a new way to play the game, which was needed at the time because things were about to get crazy in the next season. Season of the Worthy was not a great season in terms of pure loot. However, when it came to mods, it made the loot worth it. Warmind Cells were an early version of Tingles, however they were better in every single way. These bad boys had the ability to nuke rooms when built into properly, and it was awesome. To spawn a Warmind Cell at the time, you needed a 7 Seraph weapon. I personally used the SMG or sidearm since Izanagi's usually took my main slots, and a Warmind mod on your armor. An investment of both a weapon and an armor piece was pretty big at the time, and the return was worth it. Some other noticeable features Warmind Cells had at the time were the ability to suppress enemies, reduce their outgoing damage, heal allies, and the ability to pick it up and stick it to an enemy, as well as buffing your weapon damage by 10%. I would argue that this was a bit of a preview to Subclass 3.0, given that Stasis wasn't out at this point, which was the first of the Subclass 3.0 subclasses. While not the greatest season, Warmind Cells were awesome. and they would be used for years to come, with new weapons and interactions being able to create them in the future. Charge of Light mods were a bit weak, so Bungie did something to bring them back during Season of Arrivals. We would see mods like Energy Converter that would grant up to 40% of your super in a single grenade throw, Surprise Attack which made sidearms extremely strong for ad clear, and something like the 7 Seraph sidearm was a beast with Nezarec Sin, and Ardent Ordnance, a mod that was way before its time. While Season of the Hunts did not bring mods, Season 13, aka Season of the Chosen, aka Season of the Peak, did. But this time it was a new type of mod called an Elemental Well. These mods had a ton of synergy with subclass identity compared to the mods before. Picking up a well granted 10% ability energy if the well element matched your subclass element, and then 10% to the lowest charged ability if not. One of the elemental mods worked directly with Charge of Light, combining the systems, a massive W in my book. The main two elemental well mods that granted an effect were early versions of the Surges and Font mods that we know of today, Font of Might and Font of Wisdom. Wisdom granted you tier 10 intellects, essentially plus 100 for 30 seconds, which is currently double the strength of having 3 of those mods on nowadays. And Font of Might granted you Surge X4, or 25% elemental damage, if you picked up a well that matched your subclass. This only lasted for 6 seconds. These mods were not popular at the time, but as more came out up until Season of the Loss, things got super crazy. During Season of the Loss, Warmind Cells received their major nerf, as they were extremely powerful after being out for over a year, and there were no changes to the strength of these mods at all. Personally, I'll always take balance over removal of systems. However, this part is not about that. During Loss, Arc mods were extremely finisher and melee focused, Solar mods were explosion and healing focused, and Void mods were extremely blast ability and damage resistance focused. Something subclass 3.0 inspiration. On top of this, there were well mods that changed the amount of wells that you could create, alongside there being one that made them track to you. During this time, Stasis was in the game, so they were included as well. Stasis shards would count as an elemental well, alongside the theme of Stasis mods being time and restoration. If you remember Font of Might from earlier, this one became extremely popular given that you could create Stasis elemental wells every time you cast a super. So your Warlock teammates would cast their Well of Radiance to grant you a well, and you, the player, would have elemental time dilation to increase the length of your Font of Might. Stasis weapons were extremely popular because of this interaction, notably Reed's Regret, given that particle deconstruction was a part of the seasonal artifact as well, making it a top contender at the time. This would be the peak of mods, as they would not receive any updates until Lightfall, since Witch Queen was the year of the subclasses. Speaking of Lightfall, what happened? Bungie had discovered that selling 2 mods daily from one vendor was hard for players to acquire, and generally speaking, a new player did not know how to use them. So instead of making the system easier to understand, Bungie removed all the mods and kept a few of them at a very nerfed version. Elemental Wells were turned into 5 different elemental pickups, which only gave back 10% of the energy to a specific ability depending on the element, which also had a cooldown on generation, opposed to the cooldown being on kill. Charge of Light mods became watered down versions where at best 50% of their old value would exist if the mod itself existed. 16 of the 28 mods were removed, with 1 becoming built into your character, taking charge. Warmind Cells were completely removed, meaning that 7 Seraph weapons, which weren't already good, were indirectly nerfed, and the Achilles weapons that had just returned were no longer as good as they were a month ago. Build crafting took a massive loss to gain a few quality of life updates, like Font of Might no longer requiring a subclass to match and now working off orb pickup, and I guess kinetic surges as well, but that was about it. Charge of Light and Elemental Wells combined to be the new armor charge system, which the current game still uses to basically only buff your stats in moment-to-moment gameplay. Kickstart mods give next to no return on your investment, and finisher mods are extremely niche, besides the occasional special ammo finisher, which isn't too needed nowadays given that you can just stat dump into the weapon stat. Now we're at the current state of the game, where stat stacking is just overall better than build crafting between weapons and armor interaction. No Warmind Cells, no temporary 6-second buffs that grants powerful effects, no interesting ways to deal damage, no interesting ways to deal with enemy, which outputs on any subclass, and no way to buff your allies via mods. Personally, this is something I hope gets addressed in the future updates or Destiny 3 if it ever happens. I very much miss the depth that builds had 4 years ago. And I ask you, how do you feel about the Lightfall changes now that we're 3 years and many sandbox changes away from it? Do you think it was the best move at the time? Do you think armor mods should be expanded upon? Let me know. Until next time, stay safe, y'all. Hopefully we get some news this week. I can start happy posting, but until then, I'll see y'all later.